These graves in Srebrenica are witness to genocide in Europe, one that happened just 21 years ago. It is the single biggest atrocity on European soil since the Second World War. More than 8,000 men and boys cut down in their prime over just 1 week in 1995. Women deported, defiled, and denied their loved ones.
I decided that it's not important if I survive or die. I just have to run.
But the story of Srebrenica is a culmination of years of ethnic cleansing across Bosnia, of neighbour turning against neighbour.
It was the Serbian soldier who was putting the gun at me. And a few days before, we were sitting together in the cafe having drinks together.
And of lost youth and innocence. Every year, the number of graves at this site increases as new mass graves are discovered and bodies identified. Some may never be found. You can see etched on stone here the names of whole families wiped out as Bosnian Serbs carried out their policy of ethnic cleansing. And more than 20 years on, those who survived are still haunted by the memories. Either through death or the ravages of war, thousands of young Bosnians never had the chance to celebrate their coming of age. Among these graves is that of a 2-day-old baby shot in the head. This year would have marked her 21st. But how did it all begin? Just 30 years ago, Srebrenica was a bustling tourist town in a country bristling with money and modernity. Bosnia itself was a melting pot of cultures, a crossroad between East and West, with Catholic Croats, Orthodox Serbs, and Muslims living prosperously side by side. But after the fall of Yugoslavia, which it was once part of, came nationalism, under the guise of ethnic division. From the east, there began a campaign for a greater Serbia, cleansed of anyone but Serbs. And they started with the north of the country. Alvira Mujkanovic was 18 and living in Prijedor at the time. I've come to meet her and try and understand how things changed.
I was in school. I was the youngest one in family. I had a future that I wanted to make for myself. I was everything except the guilty one. And that's what they said. We were all guilty only because of the name of the group of people that we were belonging to.
In 1992, Serb troops came to her village.
All what I could hear at that time is 5 soldiers starting the guns and saying, "Stop." I stood there, couldn't move, and it was one person that I recognized. Sorry. He was my friend. And a few days before, we were sitting together in the cafe having drinks together.
Those former friends and neighbours began a campaign of bombing homes and forcing people to leave. And one day, she watched as the home of her high school sweetheart was blown up.
Oh God, that was a nightmare to watch from my house. Basically, everybody came from that house, except his grandma when he was trying to help her out. And that's when the house went into pieces.
Her village was turned into a concentration camp and a staging post for deportations. These images reveal the horror of the conditions.
It's 3 generations. My grandfather was in Auschwitz. My father and me, we were both in Ternopil concentration camp.
Tens of thousands of men and women, including her married sister, were bused to the area. Many were raped, tortured, and killed. But because she lived only a few feet away, Elvira was allowed to stay in her own home, but was not allowed to leave. She and her mother would cook whatever they could to feed the hungry.
I was taking food every single day. Every morning we took the milk and bread. If nothing else, that's the first thing that we had to take to the babies. And I will never, ever forget faces of these children. But they're just asking, can I have a little bit of milk? That's hard.
Elvira was saved by the Red Cross and taken as a refugee to Croatia. But more than 5,000 were killed in Prijedor. What happened in her town was soon happening all over the north and east of Bosnia. Serb forces, among the largest in the world at the time, were taking over towns at an alarming rate, with thousands of mass killings and deportations. The UN declared a safe zone in Srebrenica. Against this promise of security, tens of thousands of Muslims fled to the tiny enclave. They thought they were safe. Fatima Klempic is a doctor in Tuzla, a town north of Srebrenica. But 21 years ago, she was running for her life. Like Elvira, her hometown had been taken over by Serb forces, and her family had fled for safety to Srebrenica. The little town had swollen with refugees. Some estimates say more than 50,000. Fatima, a newly qualified medic, found herself one of only 5 doctors in what was a brutal siege.
One day, people were in big crowd in front of a middle school in Srebrenica. And then shelling starts. It's impossible to describe how it was after that. Dead everywhere, part of bodies, blood on the building, on the ground, on the road, everywhere. After everything, we count that 56 people were killed in one moment.
Crowded, starving, shelled, and sniped regularly, life in the enclave was intolerable. This is Fatima's brother-in-law. She and her husband visit him daily. As a young man in Srebrenica, he was shot in the back and is now paraplegic. A life that was full of promise is now a life full of hardship and lowliness for the crime of being Muslim. But it was about to get worse. On the 11th of July 1995, the international community that was supposed to be protecting Srebrenica abandoned it. Calls for military support and airstrikes were ignored, and the town fell. General Ratko Mladic explained this town's fate, as the fate of all the towns before it, was payback for the arrival of the Ottoman Turks 5 centuries ago.
11. jula 1995. godine u srpskoj Srebrenici. Uoči još jednog velikog praznika srpskoga poklanjamo srpskom narodu ovaj grad i napokon došao je trenutak da se posle bune protiv Dahija Turcima osvetimo na ovom prostoru.
Knowing what danger awaited, the people fled. Some, mostly women, ran to the UN base in Potocari, looking for safety with the Dutch peacekeepers. But most men knew they would find no mercy if they were caught. These same steep hills which tower over Srebrenica were the hiding place of more than 15,000 men as they attempted to reach safety. Fatima was one of only a handful of women who joined them.
I was really afraid that if I go to UN base, I will not have chance to survive. And I was afraid to be killed, and I was afraid to be raped and I decide to go to mountains with men just to have chance to decide about my life if it's necessary.
She remembers the moment she separated from her mother, who was too elderly to make the journey through the forest.
We were standing in front of hospital in one moment, me, my brother and my mother, and I thought that it could be last time to be together. I still can't talk about that without emotions.
The column of men and boys escaping from Srebrenica represented generations of Bosnia's past and future. The journey of more than 100 kilometers took more than 7 days, but most never made it. Less than half survived. Those who were caught were led away by Serb soldiers and executed point blank. Dotted along the route lie mass graves and buildings riddled with bullet holes, laying silent testimony to the mass killing of innocents. For 7 days and 7 nights, Fatima ran through treacherous woods and steep hills, avoiding ambushes, snipers, shelling, and poisoned rivers.
It was like Russian roulette. You know, like in the dreams, when you are trying to run and you can't, your legs are really heavy, and that's that feeling, I think. I was running, but I was impression that I will never reach the top of the hill.
The number of dead was increasing with every day that passed.
It was impossible if you walk around. It was impossible to step on the ground. You just stepped on the bodies. So many dead people were there.
By some miracle, Fatima survived what is now called the Death March. She found her mother alive too. But not everyone in her family was so lucky, and the number of lost relatives is great.
I never count like that because it's too painful for me. But I think from my father's family, 17 people missing, brothers of my father and their sons, and some grandsons. And from my mother, one brother of my mother and his 2 sons, and of my husbands of my aunts, 3 of them, and their son. And it's more than 40. But I used to say that I didn't lose only members of my family. I lost also my friends. I lost also my patients.
While the men who went through the hills were being hunted, those who had sought safety in the UN base were separated from the women and never again seen by their families. The women were forcibly removed and deported. Some were genocidally raped. Days later, many women arrived in Tuzla, in Free Bosnian territory, to await the arrival of the men from the hills. When Fatima arrived, she waited with them.
You know, when we walked through mountains, we didn't realize who is alive, who is dead, who is captured, what happened to anybody. You could see only small part of the column. But when we came to Tuzla, we realized that only about 4,000 people came. But we thought they will come, the rest will come. Days and days passed, and they didn't come. And then we realized that many people were killed. How is it possible that if 15,000 people start from Srebrenica, only 4,000 reach Tuzla?
Srebrenica is a global symbol of a policy of ethnic cleansing and hatred that lasted for more than 3 years. It is the last and worst of atrocities that took place in Prijedor, Zvornik, Visegrad, and many other places. In total, more than 100,000 died. More than 80,000 were Muslim. For Fatima, back in Bosnia, the impact of genocide has been to make her work harder than ever. There are still only a few doctors in Srebrenica and no gynecologists at all. So once a month, she opens a clinic for new and expecting mothers.
It's a place of horror, but something inside of me asked me again and again to go there. And I feel a lot of emotions for people who went back and who are able to live there.
And across the clinic is the largely disused town hospital. She takes me to see it and reveals something surprising. So this is the hospital that you practiced in during the war?
Yes.
When was the last time you came here?
I didn't enter.
You haven't entered?
No, since the war was over.
It lies empty, most of the rooms unchanged since Fatima locked its doors 21 years ago. And from its windows, she remembers her last minutes in the town. On the 11th of July, when you ran, where did you go to?
That way.
This way here?
Yeah.
And you went around this road
yes.
and up that mountain?
Yes, and between the hills.
That is a very high mountain.
Yes.
You must have been terrified.
Yes. I don't know how we manage it. I don't think I could repeat it. I won't be able.
Over 1 million people were made refugees by Serb ethnic cleansing. Some found refuge in the UK, like Elvira. She was plucked out of the concentration camp and sent first to Croatia, where she witnessed a miracle. She found her sweetheart.
Oh, God. That was like when you see a dead person walking. And I do remember my friend saying, you better touch him. You know, if your finger goes through him, he's not alive.
He had managed to escape the bomb that ripped through his house, but was caught by the Serbs. For a year, he was imprisoned unknown in the notorious Amarska and Manjača concentration camps. For Elvira, who had lost so much, this was a ray of light.
Yeah, we were married after 1 month. To be honest with you, I didn't plan to get married. I wanted to go to school. I wanted to go and travel and do like what all normal people are doing. But I wasn't allowed. I had to do what I think so. At that time was the only option left. You know, if I lost everything. So at least, you know, we can be together, because we don't know what could happen tomorrow. And, well, we're still together.
She was 21 when she arrived in Scotland with her husband.
I'm so grateful. I do remember when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I would walk out from my flat and you would see the bags full of toys and clothes for the baby, that I didn't know who was bringing that, you know, but they were just helping. So.
But it's not the life she imagined as a teenager.
I was planning to go to school. I wanted to be a chemist. Had so many different plans in my life, but absolutely everything changed. Everything.
Like all Bosnians who went through the war, her ambitions now focus on her 3 daughters, and she wants to ensure they never forget.
If you don't know your past, you're never going to know your future. They have to know that you can't treat people wrong or different only because they think different, they come from different group or they're different religion. You have to respect the people, who they are and their beliefs.
And back in Bosnia, Fatima is now safe too. She lives in security with her husband, also a survivor of the Death March, and her 2 children. But it's a story that she relives every day.
I always trying to go over everything and to continue with the life. Mostly, I think that my trying was successful. I survived and I have my life. I'm okay. But in every moment, if I start to think about Srebrenica, if I go in one moment to that time, and I know that I didn't get over anything.
With its empty stores and abandoned homes, Srebrenica is a mere shell of the bustling tourist town it once was. But while life stopped for those who lie buried just a few miles from here, it seems that time has stopped for those who have chosen to return. A few survivors have returned, and one day, Fatima says she will too. But for now, it's a place of mixed emotions.
I feel that I want to be here. I belong here, and I can't be here. I would like to return to Srebrenica, and I would like to work here and forever. And but now it's impossible because of my family, because of my children. I can't say to my children, you have to go to Srebrenica and to live there.
And it's for her children that Fatima continues to speak out and share her story.
I try to teach them that they have to remember and they have to share our story, and they have to teach other people how to live without hatred. I hope that time will come once all people could live in peace without hatred of your neighbors. No matter what is name of your neighbor or what is religion of your neighbor, we are all human.
Ahl al-Bayt TV, the holy household for every house.